Let's dive into the world and story of Charlotte Brontë, a woman who lived through heartbreak, isolation, and loss in the harsh world of industrial age England, but still managed to turn that pain into timeless art. Charlotte's works capture the longing, the repression, the delight, the grief that defined the women of her day. First, we'll tell you her story, and at the end, we'll reveal what Charlotte Brontë herself may have truly looked like. Charlotte's story begins on the 21st of April, 1816, in the town of Thornton, England. She was the third of 6 children born to her mother, Maria Branwell, and her father, Patrick Brontë, an Irish immigrant who had become a clergyman in the Church of England. When she was 4 years old, the Brontës moved to the village of Haworth, where her father had been offered a position at the local church. The post came with a parsonage overlooking the church and looking out onto the moors. It was a relatively comfortable life for England at this time. The Industrial Revolution was entirely changing the way people lived, for better and really for worse. A contaminated water supply was later found leading into the village of Haworth, where life expectancy was a mere 24 years old. Illness and death were a constant in this time and were sadly ever present in Charlotte's life. It all began only a year after arriving in the village. Maria, Charlotte's mother, fell ill, and she died later on September 15, 1821, leaving her husband and 6 young children behind. As you can imagine, the next few years were really rough on the family. To what degree, we don't truly know, but we can infer some of these hardships through Charlotte's later works. In her novel Jane Eyre, the main character's childhood is a miserable one. She's treated horribly by her aunt after the death of her parents, and then sent to a horrible school where her character is abused and neglected. Jane is underfed, unable to wash because of frozen water, overworked, and ridiculed into submission. During her time there, she makes a friend that helps her get through her hard days, but then the friend gets sick and eventually dies of the disease. Nearly all of these events mirror something in her real life. Charlotte's aunt did come to live with them after her mother's death, although nothing here indicates she was anything but kind to them. When she was 8, the 5 Brontë sisters were sent away from home to a school called Clergy Daughters' School at Cowan Bridge. Cowan Bridge was a harsh, damp, and disgusting place, just like in her stories, and less than a year after arriving, an outbreak of typhus spread through the school. Charlotte's 2 older sisters, Maria and Elizabeth, fell ill, and although they were sent home to recover, it was too late. After their deaths, their father Patrick removed all of his daughters from the school. But Charlotte, greatly affected by her sisters' deaths, would be forever changed by this experience. At just 9 years old, Charlotte had already learned some brutal truths. That life is unfair, that adults can fail you, and that she alone would have to protect that part of herself the world desperately wanted to crush. This message is sponsored by Raycon. So much of our daily life involves sitting, right? My long commute and then sitting down at the office or to work on Royalty Now. And then a lot of my life also involves movement, walking, cooking, or working out. But what does stay consistent is that my day is always enhanced when I find something good to listen to. Right now, Raycon's essential open earbuds are on anniversary sale, and trust me, they are worth a try. Not only are they half the price of premium brands, so very welcome these days, but they also keep your ears open while delivering sound. As a new mom, I'm always listening and on high alert for baby cries, so I can't just be holed up with noise-canceling headphones somewhere and not hear my daughter. These are perfect for when I'm cleaning or cooking around the house, and they always feel so secure in my ears. The long battery life let me listen all day long and still be aware of my surroundings. I also just love the fun colors. So many products feel so boring, and why should they be? This lavender color is so cute. Support our channel by trying Raycon earbuds for yourself. Click the link in the description box or go to buyraycon.com/royaltynowOpen to get 30% off your essential open earbuds. Now the eldest daughter of the remaining 4 Brontë children, she would try to protect them too. And over the next few years, the four, Charlotte, Emily, Anne, and Branwell, became extremely close. Their father, Patrick, terrified of sending them back to a school, turned their home into a quiet kind of sanctuary and made sure to encourage all of his children to read, allowed them to learn music, art, poetry, and even talk about politics, giving his daughters access to things most girls didn't have at the time. Even though she loved poetry and literature, what Charlotte loved most were her mother's copies of the Ladies' Magazine. These featured fictional love stories, social gossip, fashion, and music. She would completely wear them out, reading them from cover to cover again and again. She later said, "I will never see anything which will interest me so much again." The magazine seemed to inspire something in Charlotte, and soon she began writing her own stories based on people she read about or knew, reimagined in a world that she could control. It didn't take long for her siblings to begin to write as well, and together they created an intertwining imaginary world called the Glass Town that held and intertwined all of the stories they wrote. Charlotte and her sisters would write about love affairs and high society, and their brother Branwell wrote about battles and military life, with their characters making appearances across each other's tales. They even wrote a newspaper for the town and a magazine that they kept publishing for years on end, expanding the stories throughout their teenage years and even into adulthood. When Charlotte was 15, it seems enough time had passed for her to be sent away to a boarding school called Roe Head, where she would study to become a teacher. I'm sure after her childhood she was nervous about leaving home again, but Roe Head ended up being a completely different experience than the depressing school of her youth. She was treated well and even ended up meeting two girls, Mary Taylor and Ellen Nussey, who she became extremely close with. The three women would remain friends and write to each other through their whole lives. These letters are where we get Charlotte's true, candid thoughts about the things going on in her life. When Charlotte turned 18, she would get a job at Roe Head. But in her letters to Ellen, Charlotte would admit that she was so lonely and hated her life as a teacher. It was repetitive and infuriating to deal with her oafish students. She would call her school days a time of mental poverty. But even still, she endured it, sending every penny she earned towards helping her younger siblings, hoping they would be able to use it to have a better life. For years, she would remain, escaping her misery the only way she knew how, by closing her eyes, imagining a different world, and writing it down. Just before her 21st birthday, she wrote to a poet she admired named Robert Southey, hoping for a response and maybe some encouragement. She soon received a letter back, and in it he wrote, "Literature cannot be the business of a woman's life, and it ought not to be. The more she is engaged in her proper duties, the less leisure she will have for it, even as an accomplishment and a recreation." Charlotte would write a curt thank you in response, but made it clear she would do it anyways. She did not submit to the idea that she was somehow less of a full human being just because she was a woman. In her writing in Jane Eyre, you can see this tension come to the surface, with the main character stating, "Do you think I'm an automaton, a machine without feelings? Do you think because I am poor, obscure, plain, and little that I am soulless and heartless? You think wrong. I have as much soul as you and full as much heart." Charlotte, her sisters, and her characters were women, but most importantly, they were real people with feelings just as complex, just as irrational, and just as fickle as any man's. One of those feelings was love. Ever since she was a girl, she found herself dreaming of a sweeping love, but it failed to find her. In 1839, she received a proposal from Henry Nussey, the brother of her friend Ellen, but she denied him. She would finally leave her job, finding work as a governess for a few years, but later came to despise her employers for treating her like a servant. In 1842, when she was 26 years old, she found work alongside her sister at a boarding school in Brussels, Belgium, run by a man named Constantine Hager. They had gone there hoping to learn from Hager how to run a school, because their dream was to open one of their own. But over the course of the next 2 years, she didn't just learn about how to run a school. she learned about one of her deepest desires. Charlotte had fallen deeply in love with Constantine Hager. Although there's no real evidence that he shared her feelings, Hager's wife soon found out about Charlotte's feelings, and she was sent home to Haworth. In 4 letters sent back to Hager, Charlotte expresses how deeply she misses him and wants him, but he doesn't write back. Back home, Charlotte tried to move on and started up a boarding school with her sisters, but no students came. She and her sisters tried publishing a book of poetry under male pseudonyms, Currer Bell for Charlotte, Ellis and Acton Bell for her sisters, but it only sold 2 copies. Still, Charlotte could not give up. Instead, she begins to write a story using her own life as the muse. She said, "I'm not ambitious for married life, but I am ambitious for my sisters." The following year, Charlotte wrote, edited, and then rewrote her stories, until finally she finished the one that would change her life forever. A story told from a woman's point of view, raw, emotional, and thoughtful. In 1847, Jane Eyre was published under the name Currer Bell. It was a hit. Readers were shocked. It was bold. It felt intensely personal. Some women must have felt for the first time in their lives that they were not alone. Charlotte's writing on the sometimes quietly suffocating lives that the women of England were experiencing at the time was like a drink of water on a hot day. It completely and totally wedged its way into the psyches of these women. At first, the book was a critical success, but some began to suspect that Currer Bell had too much insight and respect for the feelings of a woman to be a man, and rumors began to spread. Her sisters had also released books that felt much the same way, which only fueled the suspicions more, and gave way to some critics thinking the books to be crude and improper now that they may be the words of women. This only made it more popular. But just as her career began to take off, fate and tragedy would reach Charlotte Brontë. Throughout her life, Charlotte always said that the dingy, disgusting school of her youth forever changed the lives of she and her sisters, making them sickly and small of stature. Historians now believe they may have all caught tuberculosis there. Her brother, Branwell, would suddenly die in September of 1848 after a life drifting between jobs and ultimately alcoholism. At the funeral, Charlotte's sister Emily caught a severe cold and due to her weakened state could not recover. She died with her sisters by her side in December of that same year. Unfortunately, this closeness led to Anne also becoming sick, with her intense grief only making her health worse. When the doctor came to see her, he diagnosed her with consumption and had little hope of her recovery. Anne would write in a letter that she had no fear of death, but that she wished God would spare her just for her father and Charlotte. Unfortunately, she would die in May of 1849 at the age of 29. In the quiet parsonage that used to be her sanctuary, the candlelight flickered over 3 empty chairs, and Charlotte sat alone. Moments so dark as these I have never known. She did the only thing she knew to escape her unimaginable pain. She wrote. Over the course of the next few years, she would write 2 more books named Shirley and Villette. But the deaths of her sisters changed her severely. When she revealed her identity to her publisher, she began to be known in London's exalted social circles, and a lucky few were even able to meet her. But instead of the passionate genius who had all of London talking, reading, and speculating about her, Miss Brontë was silent, serious, and not particularly interested in conversation. It was said that she had a startlingly direct gaze, full of sorrow. But she didn't need to impress the room. Her pages spoke for themselves. And then, when it was least expected, Charlotte finally found love. Arthur Bell Nichols, her father's curate at the church, had secretly been in love with her for years, and finally confessed his feelings. At first, she didn't say yes, but over time, something changed. Maybe it was trust. Maybe it was just the peace of having stability. Or maybe finally, Charlotte felt truly loved for the first time. They were married in June of 1854 when she was 38 years old. Love was no longer just in her stories. This time it was real. Unfortunately, her story didn't have a happy ending. It's believed that the same disease that had taken her sisters was now coming for Charlotte as well. On March 31st, 1855, less than a month before her 39th birthday, Charlotte Brontë died. Although Charlotte's life was one of tragedy and hardship, her story highlights the indomitable human spirit to continue living even in the face of despair. She simply wrote the truth about longing, about loss, and about the quiet strength it takes to survive. And in doing so, she helped generations of women feel a little more seen. Although her life was short, her words have continued on. And in every lonely reader who finds strength in Jane Eyre, Charlotte still lives. So, what did Charlotte Brontë really look like? Finding the true appearance of Charlotte takes a little bit of historical portrait detective work. Fans of the Brontë sisters have long been searching for more authenticated portraits, or even photographs of the women. And there might be one, but first, let's go over what we know for sure. There are 2 authenticated images. First, this chalk sketch by George Richmond, which was made when she was 33. It was actually commissioned by her publisher as a gift for her father, and it was prized by the family. After her death, her husband bequeathed it to the National Portrait Gallery. But historians consider this portrait to be flattered, meaning it makes her look a little more delicate than her other confirmed likeness, which is this painting of the sisters from the 1830s by their brother Branwell. While most historians considered this a poorly executed painting, it seemed like no one disputed that it did truly look like the sisters. People visiting the Brontë home would always praise its accuracy, at least in the girls' features. They were also quite young here. Charlotte was probably in her late teens, so she may have looked quite different from her early 30s. Where it gets tough for me as a person who has to recreate this is that when we compare the portraits, they have some big differences. George Richmond's sketch is definitely more flattering. It seems to slim her face and make her a bit more elegant. It's certainly a much more skilled drawing. But then we look at Branwell's and everyone agrees it's the best likeness, but it's just not a good painting. But maybe there's one more image. There is a really interesting photograph, well, actually a copy of a daguerreotype, of the 3 sisters. The image was discovered in a messy attic in France. Crazy to think what else might be hiding in attics around the world. And it's believed to show Charlotte on the left, Emily in the center, and Anne on the right. The image was taken by the same photographer that was hired to document Charlotte's town after her death, and it has a label that says it's the Brontë sisters. In fact, it was found amongst a stack of other images also related to the Brontës and their town. Analysis revealed that Charlotte and Emily are wearing cloaks in the Belgian style, which makes sense because they were known to have taught there. Even the slight droop of Charlotte's mouth on the left-hand side is captured, seeming to match both authenticated portraits. The woman believed to be Charlotte is striking in her direct gaze. Although it's hard to tell in black and white, Charlotte was known to have these beautiful, indiscriminate colored eyes. Some people described them as reddish-brown, some said they were blue or gray. She was also said to be a very small person, kind of dainty in appearance. If this photograph is her, it captures her notorious shyness and piercing eyes really well. The only mark against this being authentic is Emily's hat. It's more of an 1860s style than the 1840s when this would have been taken. The main problem I see when comparing the 3 is that the photograph shows Charlotte with a much heavier bone structure and really deep-set eyes. Otherwise, the proportions match pretty well. While it's still not confirmed, I think there's a very solid case for this being an authentic likeness, and I'm going to use it to bring Charlotte Brontë back to life. Let's check out the face of Charlotte Brontë now. wanted to point out some details I added to this image during creation. First, I wanted to make sure her costuming was accurate. Women's fashion in the 1830s and 40s was just as repressive as the themes Charlotte explored in her literature. Fashion historian Jane Eyre states it well. Fashion illustrators no longer depicted the fashionable lady as an animated and spirited being. Now she's timid and sheltering behind her bonnet. Clothing during this time for women takes an almost puritanical angle. Women were discouraged from looking too healthy. It was actually considered vulgar. What she's wearing here would be a typical middle-class woman's daily outfit. The shawl seen here or some kind of cloak or dress covering was always encouraged when going out in public, and it helped in drafty buildings. Lastly, there was a big cameo brooch trend during this time, which I kind of love, so I've added one here as well. And now let's look at what she might look like if she lived in the modern day.